Welcome to Plato's Cave. I'm Jordan Myers, and today we are going to take another step towards escaping the cave by actually rewatching or re-listening to an old episode that I am transferring over from my other show, That's BS. So, as I said before, this show is basically the new start to anything that I'm doing related to philosophy, and that show is continuing to be a political show, a show about society, culture, a more laid-back discussion show. So this is an episode that I had previously done on That's BS, but I think it's relevant to this show and its topics, and so I'm going to carry it over. So here it is, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to That's BS. I'm Jordan.
I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
And Giffin is joining us again for another episode. Giffin, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to discuss something called moral hypocrisy. And I think actually to begin, we might want to take some time to define what moral hypocrisy is. Because I don't actually know how straightforward it is. So we're going to cite from a few sources today, but after reading them, it seems like, for the most part, moral hypocrisy is different from just like logical inconsistency or incompatibility. So reading from one of the sources, which is psychology.ire, iResearchNet, which it's some, I don't know, I got this from some other source. I think it's pretty reputable. But it says that on defining moral hypocrisy, it says Webster's Desk Dictionary of the English Language, 1990, defines moral as, quote, of or concerned with principles of right or wrong conduct, to being in accordance with such principles, unquote. It defines hypocrisy as, quote, a pretense of having desirable or publicly approved attitudes, beliefs, principles, etc., that one does not actually possess, unquote. Moral hypocrisy is the motivation to appear moral while, if possible, avoiding the cost of being moral. This is in opposition to moral integrity, which is the motivation to act in accordance with moral principles, to actually be moral. So I thought, I don't know, I want to hear your guys' thoughts, but I thought that definition was interesting because they sort of, I guess they seem to segment moral from hypocrisy. But another paper that I read called Moral Hypocrisy, Moral Inconsistency, and the Struggle for Moral Identity from Stanford University said that the actual term of moral hypocrisy is kind of redundant. Because to be a hypocrite entails being moral. I don't know. Did you guys catch that distinction? What did you think of it?
I guess it kind of just depends how you define it, because like the first definition you gave, like the second definition was being in accordance with such principles, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, yeah, you kind of are, you're not really moral if you are not being in accordance with, you know, what you view to be moral. Even if you put on some sort of pretense that you are behaving such, you know, in such a way. So it makes sense based on the first definition, but I could see how you could define it differently.
Yeah,
do you get what
actually,
I mean?
I do. And the funny thing is that, like, I guess in some of these papers, there's sections that suggest that is actually kind of an open question. Like the idea that what is it? How immoral is it actually to not adhere by something you espouse to be moral? But I know. So Giffin, you read like this article about physician fatigue that kind of had a little bit to do with this, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I got the idea for this topic. Mm-hmm. It was an article that was describing some of the physician burnout that's a pretty popular topic in the last decade, might be contributed to through moral injury, which is kind of working and acting in a way that contradicts your stated values, in a way that has a negative consequence, either like emotionally or physically manifesting.
Mm-hmm.
Physicians in general might want, what's best for the patient, but, financial considerations or like practical considerations might get in the way of like, their hopes for the patient. And that the argument in the article that I read was that is contributing almost as much as like the physical, like long hours and such, to like burnout.
Mm.
Do they? I don't know if you recall, but like, did they differentiate that from being like empathically drained by their patients? Because I know there's psychology work that shows that, like people who are, especially in like care fields, too empathetic towards their patients experience the same sort of drain. Did they like have any way of like dissociating those two?
I don't think they use that terminology, but I would imagine that angle would be kind of incorporated into their argument in that in order to like feel moral injury, you have to like have some empathy which like could be contradicted in like the realities of practicing medicine.
That's a very interesting paradox that you wouldn't expect. It's like the less empathetic you are, the potentially more successful you could be as a doctor. I mean, like, that's a sweeping statement, obviously, but it's just interesting the correlation.
Yeah, a hot take. Brian destroys empathy. Like, why?
Well, I mean, that statement's probably pretty true. Just regardless of this topic, you know what I mean? Just because the best doctors will likely become surgeons, you don't have to have too much empathy to be a surgeon, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could probably probably the most successful like surgeons, like you just said, are the ones that actually don't have much of an issue with greeting the parents of the grieving parents who just lost a child in the operating room, because there wouldn't be as much, like you said, empathetical drain, because you would just be like, yeah, I mean, things didn't go as right as we had hoped, and yeah, he's dead, and they're like weeping, and you're like, yeah, it happens sometimes statistically.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's interesting though. I don't think the other side of the distribution is good at being a doctor either, though, right? Because you still need to express some sort of empathy when greeting the parents of the deceased child. Otherwise, they'll be like,
this
asshole. Yeah, this asshole just said your son died because fucking physics.
Yeah, you can't just dribble a basketball into like the waiting room. Just be like, "Yo, what's up? Your son's dead.
What's up, homies?"
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't be. I wouldn't say you would have to be blunt about it. You could probably put on some sort of facade. But I'm saying that people who truly empathize with the parents every time, a child died, well, then that would be just draining after just a year, right? But if you're someone that it doesn't affect as much, well, you might last a lot longer in that field.
Jordan, you'd be great.
What?
I was just making a joke. You'd be great at being a surgeon.
Oh, I don't know. I'd probably be pretty good at that part of it. I don't know about like the getting through med school part.
Not drinking coffee.
It is important to like the work that I was referencing there was done by Yale psychologist Paul Bloom, and he takes like great care to like clarify that empathy is different from compassion, because compassion is like caring about the fact that it's another human being whose life is in your hands, but empathy is relating to that person as if it was yourself. So have you ever seen like the commercials for those like Sally Struthers commercials or whatever, like, you can help this child in Africa, like South Park did it. South Park did like a funny did you ever see that, Adam? I know.
No, I haven't seen that parody.
Oh shit. All right, well then never mind. But when they show those commercials for to like give to some charity in Africa, there were studies that showed that as you increase the number of need shown, the level of care is inversely related to that. So it drops, which is super counterintuitive, because it's considering that the same, like if you show, some starving little girl in Africa, people's care is pretty high. They're like, oh my God, that's just awful. And they're more likely to give. But if you zoom the camera out a little bit and you show that same starving girl and her starving brother, their care decreases, which is super counterintuitive. But that is empathy at work, because you can't relate to two individuals as well as you can relate to one. And then when they zoom the camera even farther out and they show all the children in the village and they're all starving, people's care just drops through the floor.
Interesting. I wonder if that's because the thought of it becomes more abstract, because instead of just, a person starving, it's more generally becoming starvation, which is less relatable. Did they attribute a reason why that happened, or was it just like...
I think they postulated that it was that, but it was also the fact that we tend to actually sort of project ourselves onto the other person in that scenario. So they not only showed that the number of people in need made a difference, but they also showed that the details of any one individual made a difference too. So if the person was your same skin color, or if they looked like you, your care was also higher than it was otherwise. So empathy is kind of racist, actually, in that way.
Hell yeah, brother.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I had never thought about that before, that you really can't truly empathize with two people simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because even if you think you are, you're rather just kind of switching, kind of a reference frame at that point, right? Because you're like, okay, I empathize with this person, then I switch to a different person, but putting yourself in the shoes of two different people simultaneously seems like maybe an impossible feat.
Yeah. And it's I think this tangent was related actually though to what Giffin was talking about, because I think it's related in the sense that like you said actually, Adam, the toggling back and forth between people is sort of the same problem I think a lot of physicians are facing with toggling back and forth between two conditions of moral hypocrisy, like Giffin was talking about, where they have to they have to obviously work within the bounds of whatever medical organization they're working in. They can't administer drugs that they aren't allowed to administer, or they can't do a procedure that they don't have clearance for. But then they're also, and like Giffin said, they have to, work within the financial incentives of things like insurance companies and hospitals, and you get caught up in like a ton of red tape. But at the same time, they're also compelled by the, like the empathy they feel, not incorrectly, towards that patient that they have, and the compassion to want to help them. And so that sort of disjunction, I think, is what Giffin was saying the study claimed caused the burnout. Is that right?
I'd say contributed to the burnout, not fully caused. I mean, doctors are known to, work very long hours, and I don't think they were arguing that was insignificant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, yeah, you really could attribute the hours to it as well. But that's actually interesting, because it seems like, so do you guys see that as, because this is a question too, because I want to kind of define moral hypocrisy a bit more, like I said. So I almost don't even know if that really counts as moral hypocrisy. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Because it seems like, do you guys think that moral hypocrisy has to be a competition between a vice and a virtue, or could it be a competition between two virtues, and like which of those two options fits in this case better?
Can we define vice and virtue first?
Oh, sure. So, I mean, in a kind of an Aristotelian sense, virtue is a character trait that is morally good. So honesty, integrity, charity, bravery, something like that. In this example, something like compassion. and vice is either an excess or deficiency of a virtue. So, a deficiency of bravery would be cowardice. An excess would be brashness or carelessness. For compassion, too much might be something like empathy, and too little might be something like callousness. So I was just curious, like, I don't know, like, do you guys think that it has to be vice versus virtue, or could it be virtue against another virtue to count as moral hypocrisy?
It's probably vice virtue.
Mm-hmm.
I think because often it kind of goes back to that moral cost. Like there is a moral cost associated with doing the right thing, right? So it's like it's possibly easier to kind of act out on a vice rather than a virtue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's generally the case, right? I mean, maybe you could probably give me a good area where it could be two virtues, but when it comes down to acting a different way than what is morally right, it's because it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But
yeah, I have some thoughts on that too. I didn't read the exact same things you guys did, but I can tell you what I kind of perceived as moral hypocrisy. Kind of moral systems in general kind of have an incentive system where you receive benefit when others act in a morally upright way, but you are incentivized to capture like the most benefit by going against the system if you can keep the facade up. If that makes sense? Kind of recognizing
like the
structure
free
kind of
rider
being
problem.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So moral hypocrisy, I kind of imagined, and I got this from I think one of the readings, that's a situation where you have a stated belief, and you kind of go against that to kind of capture a little bit of positive consequence for yourself, while still trying to keep the facade up, which is kind of like accepting the system, but without the burden associated with, keeping the system
without paying rent. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Without paying the rent. And Jordan, were you asking about how this relates to, or if this is different than like the physician question?
Yeah, well, I was kind of thinking about whether that situation actually was a case of moral hypocrisy then, or if it was just a case of, I don't know, just kind of a shitty situation to be in. Yeah.
So the way the article didn't describe it as moral hypocrisy, it used the term moral injury, and I think the key there is that in the moral hypocrisy sense, I got the kind of impression that this is something that like you kind of do knowing that it's wrong and you like feel some benefit from, but moral injury is something where you feel a negative consequence from. Maybe it's like a lose-lose situation where following through on your morals might mean like losing your job because you did something that the hospital said like you can't do. Like you didn't charge someone for like an emergency surgery. The hospital's out $10,000, but like the alternative is, you don't give them the surgery and you still feel bad. So maybe that's kind of like the difference is like whether you're getting benefit versus a loss, or like you're just minimizing a loss.
I agree with that because there seems to be a heavy moral cost either way. Right? Even if you're not, serving your patients properly, you're going to morally feel like absolute shit. But, but if you do properly care for your patients within, this system that very, isn't conducive to proper care, I don't know, you're going to probably just mentally, what's the right word? I guess kind of fall apart. I don't know.
You're going to feel burdened.
It's going to be an immense burden. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
implode.
I actually like the idea of making moral hypocrisy require the alternative to give you some benefit for going against the system. I think that's accurate.
I don't know if that's the actual definition, but that's kind of what I imagined it is. It helped me kind of grasp it.
I mean, I don't know if there is a codified definition though, because I mean there are seemingly pretty reputable sources that are disagreeing amongst each other. Um, so I guess the second question that I think we should iron out is, it, can you be hypocritical without being moral, like amoral? I mean, so not immoral or moral, but amoral. Because one source seemed to be saying yes, and one source seemed to be saying no. Because
isn't that predicated on having a moral system? Isn't moral hypocrisy?
Well, I mean, what do you mean?
Isn't isn't moral hypocrisy predicated on there being a moral system?
Yes. But I guess the question is like, could you be hypocritical without it falling into the moral realm?
So Jordan,
okay.
You're kind of curious what isn't all hypocrisy moral hypocrisy? Is that your like question?
Yeah, that's the question. I don't know because the sources seem to disagree. Here's a quote from the Monin and Merritt paper. They say the phrase moral hypocrisy is thus somewhat redundant. Hypocrisy by definition refers to virtue or goodness, and it is used in other domains only by extension. In fact, even when used to refer to deception, a non-moral domain, hypocrisy is still ethically problematic because it involves dishonesty. So what's an example of this? Like, if
okay, you have one?
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, just what if something small, like, where tell people, I would prefer people to take off their shoes in the household. I don't like when people wear shoes in the household. But you're just kind of walking around casually in your own shoes whenever people aren't around, right? So it's kind of like it. I mean, like, what necessarily, like, what moral precepts are you sort of?
Huh.
I don't know. I mean, you're kind of just being a little dishonest with it. I mean, because you don't
kind of being a little bit of a dick, yeah.
But I can imagine it being the case. You know what I mean? Like, that's not too far out of the question because you would prefer not to clean up after other people. You're okay cleaning up after yourself, but
is that hypocritical though? I don't know.
I'd prefer people who don't wear shoes in the house and you're just walking around wearing shoes. I mean,
I'd call that hypocritical.
Wait, I don't know though, because like, wouldn't hypocritical? It has to be like a 1-to-1 ratio, because like, if you genuinely don't mind cleaning up after your own shoes, but you just don't see like you just don't want to clean up after other people. I don't know that
wasn't his stated like concern though.
Yeah, but think about if you live within a house with other people as well. You know what I mean? So like, so everyone sort of
hypocritical.
Yeah, so everyone sort of collectively does the cleanup, and you would prefer not to clean up. So I don't know.
Yeah, but do you think that that's amoral?
I don't think it fits as cleanly into.
I don't think it's super clean.
Yeah, I don't know.
It seems to trail into the moral realm a little bit.
In the sense that it's dishonest.
Yeah.
But it's not like you necessarily there's anything moral about wearing shoes in the house or not, right?
No.
It's just dishonest to kind of claim that you would prefer people not to wear shoes, but do it yourself.
Yeah. Okay, what about this? Maybe this is a cleaner example. What if, like, Brian suggests to Adam that you use malware software, and he's really adamant about that, but then he himself doesn't use malware software. Is that being hypocritical?
Depends why he isn't using malware software.
I think I think that no, I think Adam's spot on with that. I think
really?
It does
okay. What do you mean though? Like, what would be the conditions that would change it?
I mean, maybe he has a higher level software because he know software better, but for someone that doesn't know these things as well, malware works. I don't know, but if he doesn't have
Or
if he doesn't have anything to supplant it, but he's just recommending that people protect themselves against malware, but doesn't do it himself, yeah, that's kind of hypocritical. I would think he's working for some malware company at that point. So.
But is it amoral, do you think?
Can we define amoral?
Having nothing to do with morality, orthogonal to morality.
Okay.
So immoral is wrong and moral is like correct, right?
Yeah.
And then amoral is just it's on a separate plane.
Okay.
If you accept that, so if I accepted that I should have antivirus, anti-malware stuff on my computer, but I don't, and then recommend to Adam that he does have that, would I be hypocritical? Because I don't have it on my computer, but I accept that I should.
Okay, I think I have an idea of like this question.
Okay.
So I keep thinking about how we like just, in layman's term, think of like what is hypocritical. And I think the conclusion I'm coming to is it's really just a contradiction. Like you're a hypocrite if you've like things that you've stated and done are contradict each other. And so I think the question of whether or not someone is being hypocritical is really dependent on like the logical assumption and then like the logical breaks. So I think if the logic follows and there's no contradiction, you're not being hypocritical. So like in the example with the malware, if the assumption here is like everyone should have malware software, right? And then if you don't have that, then I'd say that's hypocritical. But if your like statement is a little bit more specific, like other people should have malware software, or if you should have malware software if you don't know anything about technology, then like I feel like you wouldn't be hypocritical in that case, if that makes sense. But that would depend. We gotta get into like a language semantic argument with this.
Well,
But
there's
I think
also
that's
like
the fundamental thing, contradiction.
There's also like the like maybe even a clearer example is like the classic tu quoque like fallacy or whatever, where it's like the fallacy where someone points out that you can't criticize an action as being wrong because that person may do it themselves, right? So the classic example is like smoking, right? Like if I smoke cigarettes and I tell you you really shouldn't smoke cigarettes, Jordan, but I'm smoking cigarettes. It's a little hypocritical, yet at the same time, it's also fair enough, right? Like you shouldn't smoke cigarettes. I know you shouldn't smoke cigarettes, and I'm not sure. And that might be more something that's amoral, right? That would be a good amoral example because I recognize smoking cigarettes is wrong. I'm telling you shouldn't do it because I know it's wrong, but there may be other extraneous factors that lead to me not, preventing me from quitting or. You know what I mean? I don't know.
In that example, I'm sorry, Brian, do you want to say something?
No, I'm just fluttering about thinking about that.
Okay, well, so Adam, in this example, I would say it's not hypocritical if like what the person means whenever they say like you shouldn't smoke is like their fundamental logical like assumption or argument is smoking is bad, people shouldn't do it. In which case like he probably agrees with that, but like, he has the burden of overcoming like addiction. And so I think that, is a reasonable, context that explains why it's not hypocritical. But if he was like, you shouldn't smoke because it makes me look bad, you ought to be cool to smoke, then like that, maybe a little bit different.
No, I totally get your point. It's just that we're very generous in that example, but we're less generous if I in other cases, like if I were like, we all acknowledge that working out is good, right? So what if I was like, Giffin, man, you should really be working out more, but I haven't like gone to the gym in a year now, right? You would view me as somewhat of a cretin for saying that, right? Because you're like, you don't work out at all, yet you're kind of prescribing behavior for other people, right? So I don't know. But
so if you I wonder if you bundle into that statement, if you accept that you don't follow the rule that you've just established, would that for you of being a hypocrite or hypocrite? Apricot?
Would I be an apricot?
Would you be an apricot?
I guess I would be. No.
Right.
Well, I guess that kind of just relates back to one of the articles we read that
It does.
indicated that, most people actually agree with the statement that, yeah, if you throw in a caveat kind of indicating that you don't perfectly follow your own moral prescriptions or behavioral prescriptions, then yeah, I mean, people aren't going to judge you as being a hypocrite per se. So
I'm not sure I completely agree with that either, though, right? Because I think you could. I think by the definition we have established, that layman's definition, you are a hypocrite. Oh my God!
I'm a hypocrite.
You are a hypocrite, but I just don't know if you're seen in the same light. Like, it's almost like a white lie at that point, right? Because I think you're still following the definition that we laid down a couple minutes ago, right?
Well, you're not really lying though, because you're kind of just telling them straight up, "Hey, I actually don't really follow this. However, I would recommend this behavior."
Okay, so I guess wrapped into being a hypocrite. Oh
My God,
Is
that's
lying.
like
Yeah.
attempt number
This is
8.
incredible. Hypocrite.
It's not good because
Hypocrite.
it's kind of an essential word of the talk today.
Yeah, it's terrible. I'm just gonna say hippopotamus from now on.
Yeah. Okay.
What about this? Okay, would we agree on this? So it seems like, okay, from what we've said, being a hypocrite entails you have to, and okay, so being a moral hypocrite, committing moral hypocrisy, entails you sort of across the board castigating or morally denouncing an action that it does clearly cross into the moral frame while also committing the action yourself. Does that fit the bill for everyone?
Yeah, and I guess like we said earlier, there has to be some sort of almost moral benefit to you as well for sort of evading that moral cost associated with what you know is moral.
I wouldn't say moral benefit, but I'd say some utility.
Yeah.
broadly.
No, you're right.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it wouldn't have to actually be a moral benefit, but it could still that would still fall under moral hypocrisy.
It'd be like I get $1 for it. It's not like a moral benefit. It's a $1.
It's a monetary one.
Yeah.
So what's a case where you
An
wouldn't,
apricot.
you wouldn't? Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't reap a benefit from, and while still meeting the other criteria that we just laid forth.
No, you would reap a benefit. It has to be just. Giffin was saying it has to be just some sort of benefit. It doesn't have to be like moral praise.
So I'm wondering about the case where we wouldn't call someone a hypocrite. This is incredible.
This is bad. This is clearly something you can't.
Brian,
I'll dub it over.
Brian, Giffin's medical example, right? Because it's hard to call them moral hypocrites when they're being punished in some way for not following through on what they believe to be moral or what they have.
Only if they're discovered, right?
Yeah, but it's like there is a cost associated with not following through with
like a social cost.
Yeah.
So, Brian, you were trying to get us to give you an example of a situation in which you could be a moral hypocrite but not reap any benefits. Is that right?
Yeah, well, we just laid the definition. We just framed the definition where that wouldn't be possible, though, right? Because you have to reap some sort of benefit.
Easy with the pronunciation of reap there.
Sorry, I almost said rope. Sorry.
You have to really get that benefit.
Oh God! No matter what, you're getting that benefit.
Oh my God!
Poor apricots.
Your pronunciations have not been great.
I thought I said reap.
You did.
We gotta dub over a lot of that.
I gotta do a lot of audio editing on this one.
No. Let it stand.
All right. Shit. Sorry, that was a really good thing we were talking about.
That's a good question.
No. Okay. Oh.
If only I could phrase it.
You can speak it. Okay, well, what about so if you're caught, like Adam was talking about, if you're caught being a moral hypocrite, you clearly incur some sort of a social uh cost penalty. Thank you.
Cost, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but is there? I guess like I'm interested in like, is there some sort of a net neutral case, um, where like so if you don't get caught, you receive the benefits, but can it just not matter, or is it the fact that every time you are a moral hypocrite, that you're either going to swing towards the positive or negative?
In the consequences or in the action?
Uh, Either.
Because I've at least been kind of looking at it in that so in like kind of like a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at moral injury, which is where like your action produces a negative consequence for yourself, right?
Yes.
Like there's not a matter of like whether you were caught or not. You betrayed your morals and you received a negative consequence for doing that. You didn't capture any positive benefit,
Yes.
like monetary or otherwise. You captured something negative. So in the instance of moral hypocrisy, it's like something where you have a stated moral and you betray it for your own benefit. And so I guess if in that kind of spectrum, like in the action, is there some like morally neutral thing you can do? Is that kind of like your question?
Yeah, and the more you ask it, I'm doubting it. But I also wanted to add in real quick that I think you wouldn't fall under moral injury. You would still fall under moral hypocrisy if you acted with the intention of getting yourself some benefit, but you were just caught in the act. You know what I mean? Of being a moral hypocrite.
That would be moral hypocrisy. But I'm
Yeah.
trying to imagine
I just
like
wanna be
in this
clear that
scenario.
I don't.
Like betraying your morals in a way that gives you no positive or negative benefit.
I think that's such an edge case that it's not really feasible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it may not be realistic.
I think I would just call that foolish moral hypocrisy.
Yeah, that's just like 1 in a million moral hypocrisy. It's just like you come out truly net even out of like a scenario. It's just like, all right,
I betrayed my morals for nothing.
It's a masochist
with the expectations that I would get nothing.
Yeah, you're just a moral nihilist at that point. You're just like, let's just betray it for the spite of betraying it. Then
Yes.
Well, I feel like at that point there would be like a moral negative. I don't know that you could get a true neutral like that because you're assuming a moral case.
Because even in cases where you're like, okay, you might have to do something that is against your morals, you've somehow rationalized it so that it's, you see it as something good in the long term, right? But even in that case, you're viewing it as, I guess it would depend on the situation, right? It would really have to depend, because if it only benefits you, then once again it's moral hypocrisy. But if you think it benefits other people, then it wouldn't go against your morals in the first place. That's the way you would act regardless. So so that's kind of a moot point. You get what I mean by that?
So you actually introduced a social dimension, like outside of ourselves. Like...
Yeah, but I mean, even if you were to act, like what I said made no sense, because if you were to, because if you were to act,
I was gonna say, wouldn't that be virtue against virtue?
It would be, but then ultimately, whatever you decide would probably be within the purview of your morals, right?
Yeah, like
it wouldn't suddenly just fall outside of it. You would probably go with what you think is right. Mm-hmm. So it's not, you're not, going outside the bounds of your own morality. So
yeah,
so it would just be like the morals of a masochist almost.
Well, what would be what Adam just said?
What were you talking about earlier with the
true neutral?
Oh, well, just the nihilist, yeah.
Yeah, the 1 in a million is the masochist morality. It just, you know what's right. It's just like, it's not going to really help you out, but you just do the opposite anyway. So.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
So here's the last question that I had then, in like nailing down the definition. So to be a moral hypocrite, do you have to kind of know in the back of your mind, or like the deep recesses of like kind of your gut almost, do you have to know that you're like being inconsistent? Or is your conscious awareness of it not really actually a necessary condition for being a moral hypocrite? So maybe I can like kind of elucidate it with an example. If okay, how about this? If there is a politician per se who is speaking in front of Congress and they're lobbying against the ability to own a gun, but they themselves own a gun, is that a case of moral hypocrisy if in fact they really do believe, like they're take them at their word that they really actually do want to impose a ban on guns?
I don't think that would be moral hypocrisy. The contingent on one point, if he thinks that the issue isn't that people shouldn't own guns, but that the Congress should institute a ban, in which case he could like be successful, Congress would institute a ban, he would lose his access to gun, and he would feel like he has morally fulfilled his he would feel morally fulfilled in general, not betraying any point.
Okay. But
I agree with Giffin that caveat needs to be there. Like, if he intends on keeping his gun, even when he goes out there and proclaims the evils of owning guns, then yeah, he's a moral hypocrite.
Yeah, in all these examples, I'm trying to find a contradiction, but so much is contingent upon like the original statement and like the social context too. Because like there's a dimension of like saying something, and then there's like kind of like what do you actually like mean? Like what is the moral belief behind you saying that? You're lobbying or you're pointing out something that is amoral.
Can I quote from the New York Times article?
Please.
It's called "The Real Problem with Hypocrisy" by Gillian Jordan, Rosanna Summers, and David Rand. The four of them also worked with, there were several studies that we've mentioned, I think, or at least alluded to so far. It was the three of them with Paul Bloom, I think, also. So okay, here's the article. What exactly is the problem with hypocrisy? The answer may seem self-evident: not practicing what you preach, lacking the willpower to live up to your own ideals, behaving in ways you obviously know are wrong. These are clear moral failings. And then this is them speaking. We contend that the reason people dislike hypocrites is that their outspoken moralizing falsely signals their own virtue. People object, in other words, to the misleading implication, not to a failure of will or a weakness of character. So they're saying, it's kind of similar, I think, to what we've been saying, that the actual problem with moral hypocrisy is not just this inconsistency between words and actions, but it's that people are, they're building social capital almost on this idea that they are virtuous by decrying something, even if they do it behind closed doors. That's the real issue with hypocrisy.
Yeah, and that's kind of perceived hypocrisy, right? But in true moral hypocrisy, we kind of have to know the state of mind of the person as well.
Yes.
I think we have to know that they know what is right and what is wrong, that they are actively preaching one thing that they believe is right while behaving in a way that's wrong in their own mind. And the thing is, there's a way that you could kind of observe someone and assume they're acting hypocritical, but they may not be acting hypocritical. Like in the same way that, like your gun example, right? Like the person may truly believe that once this ban is implemented, they will lose the rights, and access to their own gun. But we don't really know that about their brain state.
Okay, but you're saying that if they were actually 100% fine with giving up their gun once the bill passed, but for now they want a gun because other people have a gun, that's not a case of moral hypocrisy.
No, because especially in that case, because that case just brings into so many other variables. You know what I mean? Because it's like they may live in an area where they just feel safer with a gun because they know that guns are so prevalent in society currently. So, but it kind of goes outside the scope of the the thought experiment you brought up, but
I agree with that though. Okay, what I want to ask, I want to give some examples then. Now that we have a working definition, and see if these are a case of moral hypocrisy or not. Uh, here, I'll start with the one from the New York Times article. Imagine you have a coworker who is something of an environmental activist. He hounds people to turn off their office lights when they step out for lunch, and gets on their case if they throw recyclables in the trash. He protests when people print documents single-sided instead of double-sided. When he's kind of a dick in the first place, no matter what.
yeah. Yeah.
While he is overbearing at times, you agree with everything he advocates. Now imagine you discover your coworker, when at home, regularly fails to do any of these things. They go on to say he's a hypocrite. You promptly revoke the moral credit you gave him for his activism. In fact, his hypocrisy now makes his activism seem not just positive, but negative. How dare he go around telling people to switch off their lights when he doesn't do it himself? So is that a case of moral hypocrisy?
Depends on the brain state, right? You can imagine someone who compartmentalizes their behavior at work and at home and may not even realize how much of a hypocrite they are at home. But if they actively know what they're doing is wrong at home, where they're like, ooh, I'm going to have this heater going in my room with the fan at the same time because you know what? I like the fact that my room's a little warm and it blows some nice warm air at me when I'm laying in bed, right? You know, just a situation like that. And they know they're kind of wrong in doing it. Yeah, they're a moral hypocrite at that point.
So yes, Adam?
Unless,
or is it depending on brain state?
No, but I'm saying, like I said before, it depends on brain state because if you're at home and you don't even recognize that what you're doing is, you know, is different than at work, like you can imagine that too, that you kind of adopt a certain personality at work where you view, you know, your behavior and other people's behavior in a certain way and then fail to view your own behavior the same way at home.
I would argue that it's moral hypocrisy whether or not like the person is able to recognize like the thing at home. And the only exception I would give to this is that if this person's moral, like the foundation of his moral argument is that like at work people should be doing these things and he truly doesn't care. But it sounds like in this thought experiment he thinks that in general people should not, that
can be
print.
assumed. Yeah.
So if we're assuming that, then I think he's a moral hypocrite, even if he kind of doesn't think about it at work, like at home. I think that moral hypocrisy can still exist, even if there's some, even if there is compartmentalization, even if there is like some self delusions or self assurances that oh, there's some reason that I'm doing this thing that if written out in front of me, I would probably say is immoral. But I'm sure there's a reason. I
think the difference here for you and me is that I would view what he's doing regardless as hypocrisy, but maybe not moral hypocrisy. I think I might be defining moral hypocrisy a little different in the sense that I truly believe that the person needs to be consciously aware of the fact that they are behaving in a way that doesn't align with their morality and also in a way that differs from what they've been preaching.
But do you believe that this person isn't aware of that? Like he goes around actively preaching, do not print single-sided, and then he goes home and does it? Like I think he should be aware. Like he just ignores it. He's just very good at compartmentalizing.
I think that might be an extreme example, though. I think there might be a lot more
fair.
subtle examples, though, of people that certainly, like let me think about this for a second.
There's a gray area I think I would agree with.
I have more examples.
Like what about I don't know. How about the vegetarians versus meat eaters, right? I think right
because
I
man myself.
Yeah. Because
when someone castigates hunting and then orders a double cheeseburger at McDonald's, yeah.
Sure, and it's like, I think they have to recognize what they're doing is wrong.
See,
I think
wondering.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering, there is an element to that. Like, if like someone like truthfully like holds like a certain moral belief and then truly never thought that what they were doing was immoral, even though like it would seem to be a contradiction, like if you presented it to them. I think there like is room for that if they truly are not aware. But I think that's different from compartmentalizing, which is kind of just like self like assurance, kind of like a practical response that doesn't require any like logic, People do it all the time.
So like what if I just don't see the situation as clearly though? How about this one? Say I'm against factory farming.
Okay.
Like I'm against the principle of factory farming, yet I eat at McDonald's on a daily basis. Okay?
That's a good one.
I may not connect the dots as fully when I'm eating at McDonald's that this is really a result and a product of factory farming. Am I a hypocrite or am I a moral hypocrite? I think for the moral part, I think I'd have to know, like when I'm in the drive-thru, I kind of know this is from factory farming, and I'm gonna get this burger anyway.
You just
I don't know.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
You know what
Here's
I mean?
the thing.
But if you really haven't connected those dots, I don't know.
I feel like if this is a case where you actually hold the belief that like factory farming is wrong, at some point you had to have thought to yourself, you know what? McDonald's probably doesn't get their low costs from like, grass-fed free-range animals. You probably had to have thought of it at one point. I don't think it needs to necessarily cross your mind at every instance of like the contradiction for it to be moral hypocrisy.
I wonder though, Giffin. I do wonder about that example just because
it's a good example.
I think if you're a pretty smart person, you'll connect the dots almost immediately. But say you're just, an average person in this country, maybe you're, below average IQ.
Okay.
You may not connect those dots. You may see like a news story on TV that just, like Jordan said earlier, castigates, factory farming, and you're like, wow, that is actually horrible. I'm certainly against that. Yet you go eat at McDonald's. I think until you realize the connection there, I think you're not a moral hypocrite.
What is the key for you?
Oh, Jordan, go ahead.
Well, I don't know. This may clear things up. So, is the key for you, Adam, how they respond once they are made aware of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Once they are aware of what's going on, they will definitely move into the moral, hypocrites.
If they don't change.
Exactly. Yeah.
But Adam, I have a question. What if they like figure out that like the eating the McDonald's is like morally wrong, and like up to that point, before they made the realization, sure, it's hypocrisy, but not moral. After that point, and like then thereafter, is that always moral hypocrisy? Or like a month later, he's back in the drive-thru, isn't thinking about it. He has 100 things on his plate. He gets a burger, goes home, eats it. Is that moral hypocrisy? Like at some point, he did realize it, but in that drive-thru, he was not like visualizing the connection. Is that moral hypocrisy?
I like where this is going because now it's getting really interesting. Yeah, because you're right. I mean,
I don't honestly know the answer.
No. I don't have a clear answer on this one either. Because like you have the realization, you go through the drive-through. That's an obvious answer. You're a moral hypocrite. But like you said, maybe you're running late one day, and you're like, damn, I gotta grab food somewhere, and you swing through McDonald's to get like an early morning breakfast or whatever, right? And that may not be on your mind at that point. Are you a moral hypocrite if it's not even on your mind that what you're doing is wrong?
Okay. Oh my God.
I don't know. I'm gonna go. I would verge. I don't know. I want to hear more input before I come down on this one.
I have two thoughts on this actually.
Okay.
So I'm imagining a scenario where like you kind of like at the first time you hear it, you realize that the action of eating McDonald's is immoral, and you kind of like some part of you, maybe not fully conscious, but maybe a little bit conscious, represses that. You kind of like tell yourself, you neglect to like remember, instead of like, writing yourself a reminder, telling all your friends about it, making sure that you put a system in place where you can act moral. You just kind of stop thinking about it. Like, did that make it morally hypocrite? Even if the next time you're at the drive-thru, like you honestly didn't think of it, because like of your actions prior made it less likely that you would remember? I'm introducing a temporal element here that makes it way more confused. But I'm curious.
Yeah, so I wonder if that transpires where you get that burger even though you weren't even thinking at that point, and then later on someone points out to you your hypocrisy. If I guess for me, I would think if you accept
throw the burger back up,
damn it, become
just
bulimic
instantaneously too. Just
Oh.
like what's the final word of like the sentence exits the person's mouth?
What if you're morally against bulimia though? You're catch-22.
Yeah.
Checkmate.
Moral
Sorry,
injury.
I interrupted you. Sorry.
You got derailed there, Brian.
Let's see. Yeah. So I think there's moral hypocrisy if you say, oh well, that was different. I was in a rush. There's moral hypocrisy. But if you say after the fact, you're right, that was wrong of me to do that. If you chastise yourself for doing that, then you're not a moral hypocrite. So does that address the temporal concern that you were talking about, Giffin, or is there more complications in there?
I guess the little bit of nuance that isn't addressed is the kind of fact that, like, even if you, like, slap yourself on the wrist after you remember, if you still don't take any action, like, is inaction working towards morals, like, you do nothing to support your morals, but you don't do anything, like, against it, you just kind of let yourself forget, is that moral or immoral? And I don't know the answer to that either, but it's a little bit confusing.
I was just gonna say I think you bring up a great point, Giffin. I do wonder to what extent someone can forget an essential piece of information like that, because it's like I think you can suppress things
all the time. Yeah.
Well, no, but if you're against factory farming and you realize one day in the drive-through what you're doing is wrong, will it strike you just a little bit every time you go back through that drive-through? I just think about
people
it.
are so good at forgetting shit that they don't want to hear, though.
And I think
they might be, but yeah.
I think also there's something to be said about, like, it's kind of baked in there, the intensity of your held belief. If you just kind of say like, yeah, factory farming is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You're introducing a magnitude problem now.
Well, let's keep
not absolute.
Hold on, we got to keep it with like full magnitude for a second. But Adam,
full on all the time.
About what about like this is super clear to me in like political senses a lot too. Like you could see like a kind of a regular suburban Trump voter that we grew up with, seeing on the news that Trump has like literally put, not he himself has, but put, his administration has put children in cages, and they could say, oh my God, like what the hell did I vote for? Like, this is awful. This is clearly immoral. But then they just kind of, they stop thinking about it. They watch a little more Fox News. Next election cycle comes around, they vote for Trump again. It happens. I think it happens like that every day, all the time.
Quite frankly, I'm having trouble imagining that the person doesn't immediately find a reason to, reassure himself instead of chastising himself first.
That's true, but say they think it's actually wrong.
Yeah.
Give the Trump supporter a shred of credit.
Yeah,
a shred of credit. All right. Yeah. Okay. So I'm trying to kind of walk through that right now because it's a really good example. I'm just trying to think here. Okay, so someone recognizes that putting children in cages is against their own moral code. Okay, they recognize that. Okay. Yet they continue to support him and rationalize that behavior of the administration through, what media they intake. They may exactly. They might find other ways to rationalize it.
And importantly, they're not saying like, on balance, I think this act that he did and will likely do in the future is wrong, but I think it's outweighed by all these other things. It's not like a deep calculation like that. It's just, well, I'm going to vote for Trump again. You know what I mean?
So I think it's worth rephrasing the question then, if we're not going to allow for like a kind of utilitarian calculation happening.
I should just say, like, real quick, the reason why I wouldn't count that as moral hypocrisy is I think that may be just something more like, moral miscalculation or whatever. You're not It's just that you're wrong about what you think is right. Not that there's like an incompatibility there. Do you know what I mean?
And there may also be too many variables there, right? Where it's
Yeah.
where it's other moral considerations outweigh that one.
Yeah, because people can be wrong, morally speaking, without being a moral hypocrite.
That might be an example of moral injury, actually, where the
Oh,
person
actually, yeah.
takes the hit of knowing that he's going to put people in cages, but it's a net positive compared to like what the other option might be. And this is assuming a binary, but I think that's
Well,
would
'cause
be moral injury in this case, assuming that those are his beliefs.
the reason why I brought it up, Adam, is because I'm in this very strange position because I agree with you, and I also think I kind of agree with Giffin, but I think you and I
Pick a side.
especially, well, but I mean, I see points to both of what you're saying. I, I mean, clearly someone has to be right, but here's the thing, Adam. Like, if I don't think that you want to give up being able to hold that person morally responsible just because they may have forgotten that, oh yeah, this administration is going to do horrible things like put immigrant children in cages. Do you know what I mean? They kind of push it out of their mind. Do you really want to let them off the hook for that? Like, is it not moral hypocrisy at that point?
That's fair, but I would have to, based on this conversation, maybe reconsider their position because they may be morally bankrupt in that area, but they are just maybe in their own heads they think the Democrats are just plainly worse for the country. And what Giffin said earlier, they may just have a utilitarian view of this whole thing where they're like, this may be, they could fully acknowledge that what the Trump administration is doing is wrong. However, they're like, what are the alternatives, right? I mean, we can't have a Democrat in there because there would be worse moral implications to come of that than simply
Abortion alone
children.
would probably outweigh that
For a lot of people, sure. I just
Yeah.
I just
don't know.
wonder because think about like what I kind of laid out there, where someone does acknowledge that it's wrong, like you said earlier. They do acknowledge that it's wrong. However, they think that other moral considerations outweigh that one.
Yeah, but I don't think that's moral hypocrisy at that point.
No,
I think
that's what I
just
mean. That's what I mean.
Okay. Yeah. But but I just meant like in the case that it was clearly moral hypocrisy. They're just like they hold the belief that children shouldn't be put in cages, but without any good reason, they just vote for Trump again. They're just like, fuck it.
That just indicates more in a pretty interesting way how a lot of our kind of morals are bundled in a way. Like they're like you kind of take the good with the bad and just you kind of ascribe to a political or philosophical point of view that seems to where the good seems to outweigh the bad, right?
Yeah, I dislike this thought experiment specifically because we kind of have to address the fact that it is bundled. You vote for a package of morals.
That's true.
And generally you just pick, you're never going to find a candidate who's going to have perfect alignment with every single moral, all the way down from like the biggest things to the smallest minute margins. So
yeah. And sadly, it's not actually a thought experiment
though, but just not, it doesn't get to the fundamental issue.
Yeah. Sadly, it's just an example, not a thought experiment.
Well, that's where I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So I guess is the thought then that we're all committing moral hypocrisy, just at varying degrees of severity?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Oh, fight!
Yeah, because like once again, you can fully acknowledge that a certain behavior of a political party is wrong, yet you vote for that party just because you think that, the moral implications are just overall better for voting for that certain party. It doesn't make you necessarily a hypocrite, like Jordan was saying earlier, just because it's out of necessity in, just today's political climate. You're not going to have like, a philosopher king that you can vote for. You know what I mean? You're going to have a political party that you either think is going to be better or worse for the country. It's not perfect.
But I would think that does make you hypocritical, just at a lesser severity. It's yeah. Go on.
Hypocritical or morally hypocritical? Because again, we did kind of distinguish those two.
So I kind of imagine this on my like kind of spectrum based on the contradiction. And if the like position of the person is this decision, voting for this candidate is more moral than like this other party's candidate, then I don't think there would be any moral hypocrisy. But yeah. I can't escape the fact that if you say like, this one thing that this party consistently does is wrong, but then continue to vote for that party, that seems like over time with consistency, like you showing like this contradiction, I feel like it might actually fall into the realm of moral hypocrisy. But I feel it
just depends.
We're dealing with bundles right now.
Yeah, it just depends, because you can imagine, like, okay, I'm going to create just a complete hypothetical here, but say the Republican Party gets even more radical than Trump, right? To the point where they're just, well, I mean, Trump currently has, ICE rounding up undocumented immigrants and, deporting them. Okay, whatever. What if he just ramps that up? He gets reelected and ramps that up to the point where, like,
He's raping the kids.
Well, we're spending 10 times the amount of money to the point where, like, you may look out your window on a random night and just see ICE patrol going through looking for people. I mean, that would be insane. But what if the Democrats suddenly were like, they lost their minds and they're like, you know what? We believe that, abortion is a woman's right up until the day of birth. You know what I mean? Up until the day of birth.
The day after birth.
We are for infanticide. But
they've got 5 years to let the child grow on them.
No, but up until the day, up until the day of birth, even when the child is fully developed at that point and would, exist and live outside the womb, at that point it could.
You've already determined viability.
Sure, that's the word. That's the word that wouldn't come to me. Viability. Sure, but so at that point, you would have to look at this and be like, okay, which is morally, worse, right? The fact that we have, immigration patrol sort of patrolling our streets at night, looking for people to round up, almost something similar to, a crystal knock, you know what I mean? Or is it the fact that we really have no regard for, a developing fetus, even up until the date of, up the day of birth? But my overall point there is that you're not a moral hypocrite for voting for either of those. I don't think, because they're both horrible.
I agree.
They're both horrible.
I agree. Well, what Giffin asked, I think, was a perfect segue to, I think, the next portion of what we should talk about, which is, does admitting that you're being hypocritical actually do some moral work to absolve you of the hypocrisy? So, to quote from the New York Times article again, in another set of studies, we found that people viewed, so first I should say, this is just purely descriptive, but I want to move it into the normative realm and ask, is this actually, like, should we morally do this? So they say, in another set of studies, we found that people viewed hypocrites as dishonest, more dishonest, in fact, than people who uttered outright falsehoods. Remarkably, hypocrites were rated as less trustworthy, less likable, and less morally upright than those who openly lied, e.g., characters who wasted energy after explicitly stating that they never wasted energy. To further test our theory, we asked people to judge non-signaling hypocrites, those who hypocritically condemn behaviors they engage in, but who explicitly avoid implying anything virtuous about their personal behavior, by saying, for instance, quote, I think it's morally wrong to waste energy, but I sometimes do it anyway, unquote. So they go on, and they say that they found that people judged these non-signaling hypocrites to be more positively judged than traditional hypocrites. So if you signaled that you were actually being a hypocrite, you were more favorably judged, and it improved your reputation than just being a regular hypocrite. And in fact, these non-signaling hypocrites, entirely off the hook, rating them as no worse than those who engaged in the same behavior but did not condemn others for it. So that's the state of the descriptive case. But I wonder, should that be the case? Like, admitting you commit the act you're condemning actually make it less immoral to do it?
I remember reading that. One thing I found really interesting is how callous they phrased that experiment. It was just like, here's something I believe in, and then but I don't do that sometimes. And that's not really how. I don't think that's really representative of how society kind of functions when a case like that occurs. It's more like, I don't believe in wasting energy, but god damn it, I do it anyway, and I feel bad about it. And there's much more dialogue there that I think makes people more trustworthy. Would associate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
fair.
I
What
think-
about this? Oh,
I was
sorry,
just
go ahead,
going to respond to your original
Yeah.
question. I think it is less immoral because I don't think you're reaping that social benefit as much anymore. So I think that was one of the real issues with moral hypocrisy, was that you are reaping some social benefits, and I think you don't reap it as much, right? Because you're kind of admitting, yeah, I'm a fallible human being, especially in this issue. So I don't know.
Yeah. Like, I mean, just to make it personal, so I mean, it's the example that we did. Like, I clearly believe that factory farming is totally immoral, and supporting that system is totally immoral. But I ate factory farm chicken today. So I'm clearly a moral hypocrite, but am I as bad of a moral hypocrite as if I was just picketing, like the city hall or whatever, just like down with down with farmed chicken or whatever? It's just like, I think that person's clearly worse.
I totally
I don't
agree.
know. I don't know,
really?
actually.
Yeah, I want to hear Giffin.
Yeah, so this is the way I've been kind of imagining it. Like the moral system, and like how I've been looking at moral hypocrisy is like the kind of framework that the moral system gives benefits whenever others work within the system, right? But if
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So the way I've been framing it in my mind is that like a moral system is one in which you benefit when others work within the system, right? And then moral hypocrisy is like when you kind of posit that, like, state that the system is moral, but then don't do the actions. So try to double dip, free rider problem, whatever, what have you.
Yeah.
But I would say that the person who, so to look at Jordan's thought experiment, the personal example, you say factory farming is bad, and then you eat factory farm food.
Mm-hmm.
And you're asking whether or not the person who pickets, and he's very vehemently posturing that they don't like factory farming, right? That it is immoral. Are they worse of a moral hypocrite?
Giffin, here's my
that's
Wait,
right.
I see where Giffin's going with this.
Right?
I like it, actually. Yeah.
I feel like that person who's picketing is actually working harder to support the moral foundation
true,
that
actually.
everyone would benefit from.
They might be moving the needle towards the right side there.
Exactly.
That's
That
fair.
makes it worse. There's a bigger discrepancy. I don't know what the actual argument is, whether they're just saying the argument louder or they actually have like slightly further in their beliefs. But I don't know that they're more of a moral hypocrite, especially if like the moral system they're arguing for like is one that people would agree with and everyone would benefit from.
But I wonder.
Well, hang on.
Yeah, go for it.
I gotta throw this out here before I forget it. But I think the main issue here is that when you throw the caveat in, you're no longer engaging in deceit on top of a failure to follow, your own moral prescriptions, right? So I think that in your case, you were like, okay, well, even though you may not be engaging in deceits anymore, the other side may be picketing. However, how come you can't picket? You could picket. Even that person could picket and still acknowledge that they don't follow through every time with, their own moral prescriptions, right? So I think that either person could picket and try to move the societal needle on the issue, but that when you throw in the caveat, you're no longer engaging in that deception without the caveat. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, Jordan, the article that you were referencing for this was kind of talking about how someone who acknowledges that they're hypocritical, we kind of view more positively than someone who just lies.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah. So I think in this case, we
I thought
would
so. Yeah.
prescribe value to the fact that they're acknowledging that the moral system ought be that way, right? I think that's kind of why we do that. Is like they agree with the system, they just failed at the system, which is kind of a human thing to do. But someone who's like a bad faith actor is trying to tear down the moral system, and we kind of view that less favorably.
Yes.
That's what I got from it, at least.
I agree.
I'm just saying within, when you give the caveat, though, I don't think you're no longer engaging in deception. So if we have like different like pretty much moral crimes that you're committing, it's like, okay, in one sense, you are reaping the social benefits without the caveats.
What do you mean by caveat exactly?
The caveat is where you indicate that you are not perfectly following your own moral prescriptions, and you admit to being a fallible human being. Like if you say, okay, I recognize that factory farming is wrong, okay?
Yeah.
But I don't always follow through with that. You could still be someone that pickets, right, and attempts to move the societal needle on the issue, but you're just being a little more honest with people. You're no longer reaping that societal reward for being, pretty much the paragon of, advocacy for factory farming. Do you get what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do. I think I would agree with you. I guess I'm just not entirely sure. We're kind of talking like very within thin margins right now, but I think we've come to some sense of an agreement.
Yeah, because I think I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I if I am, just let me know. But it's like I think we could both acknowledge that the person that includes the caveat and the person that doesn't include the caveat could both pick it. They could both attempt to move the societal needle. But the one who throws in the caveat just no longer engages in deception. That's the difference.
Yeah, okay. I see exactly what you're saying now.
Yeah, okay.
So the way I was imagining it was like that person is incurring social cost as opposed to not getting benefit. But I think you're right, actually.
Because both people could do that.
In stating the argument, it seems like you. It's not like you just don't lose anything. You actually gain from stating the moral, your morals in line with society's. So yeah, I would actually agree with you.
Nice. Huh. So now that we've talked about this, I'm curious to see if because what was interesting is like Adam and Brian, you were the two co-hosts, I think, when we talked about lying, right?
Yeah, I was there for that. So
I thought Brian was too, right? Yeah,
I think I was there.
Okay, telling. But well, what's interesting is that I know for a couple weeks after we did that episode, I was super aware of when I was lying, or like when I was tempted to lie, right?
Oh, I'm curious. I'd catch myself. I'd be like, mostly when just exaggerating the truth. You know what I mean? Where I would realize my story wasn't as
comedic effect. Yeah.
It just wasn't as good. In its truest form. So I was like, I would embellish, but continue.
Yeah. Well, now I'm curious to see if this conversation has the same effect, where I sort of notice maybe cases of hypocrisy where I haven't noticed them before.
If I see you driving by a McDonald's, I'm calling you out.
I better not be for more than just moral hypocrisy for the Sober October competition. Yeah. But I digress. All right, cool. Do we want to end it here then? I think we covered the topic fairly well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I thought it was a good talk.
Excellent. Well done, everyone.
Yeah.
Well done. See, we don't need Teddy.
Don't tell him that. He'll never come back.
Oh, I was gonna say he'll hear it, but he never listens to any episodes he misses anyway.
I've yet to meet this Teddy.
And you may never.
Second hand only.
Yeah. All right, we should close out. I mean, if anyone's still listening at this point, first of all, thank you for listening, and then second of all, I'm curious to hear if like people disagree with us, if they agree, maybe on any individual situation too, and I'd be curious to hear what people think about when they're being morally hypocritical, because there may be some glaring examples that we didn't even really think about in this talk. So if you're listening and you want to do that, you can email me at that'sbspodcast@gmail.com or comment below on the YouTube channel. Other than that, thank you for listening. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode and learned something from it. And if you want to support my work and what I'm doing, you can do so by supporting me on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Jordan Myers and donate on a monthly basis and receive rewards for your donation. Again, that's JORDANMYERS. And the links to everything will be in the description below. If you can't monetarily support me, you can support me in other ways by liking this video, commenting on it below, reviewing the show on iTunes, or sharing it with a friend or with your Twitter followers. You can also email me at platoscavepodcast@gmail.com and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_C_Myers. And if you want, you can check out my other show called That's BS. It's a more discussion-based show with me and friends. I mentioned it at the top of this episode. So if you enjoyed this, please consider supporting me on Patreon. And as always, thanks for listening.